now, here comes the fun part. These are called clickers for people who are technologically challenged like myself, but they're really called personal handheld response systems. You should have a few at your table. Pick your favorite color or your favorite flavor and hit enter. You can see how fast we're going now. Ten seconds. That's all we're going to get? Okay. Maybe some people don't like ice cream. I doubt that. They are still coming. Okay, we'll get 96. Now, what's going to happen on the real questions, at this point, we're going to go over the bar graph. Obviously, it looks like, was B chocolate? Is that everybody's favorite? So we're going to get it was chocolate. So we're going to get our expert. And based on our lunch conversation yesterday, that would probably be Alan Jennings or Rachel Bradshaw. That's what we talked about at lunch yesterday, our favorite ice cream. So here we go. And they will come up and they will give us a few words on the results of your question and what their expertise tells them that means. So let's go to the real first question and see how we can do. We're a pretty intelligent audience here. I think we can do this. Okay, as a region, how would you rate the competitiveness of the Lehigh Valley in terms of its ability to compete economically with other areas of the country? A, very competitive, B, competitive, C, not too competitive, D, not at all competitive, or E, not sure. It will start now. Make your vote. You have 30 seconds. You have 10 seconds. 30 of you still haven't pressed enter. Are they all working? Hope they're all working. Okay. All right, so where are we? We are at B, competitive. Okay. Well, I can't see the rest of the chart, though. Is the rest? Oh, 41 invalid. All right. Well, we are going to, at this point, Donald Bernhardt, who is the Director of Community Affairs at PPL. That's the job that he gets paid to do, in his own words. However, he's very, very active in the community, as you all know, and is the chairman of the board of the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation and a number of other economic hats he wears. So we are going to turn this part of the discussion over to Mr. Bernhardt.
Thanks. Talk about a risky proposition. This is where I'm supposed to have something profound to say. My answer to this question was A. I think based on some real world experience, we're very competitive. Just looking at competitiveness within Pennsylvania, for most of last year, there was a significant chunk of the year last year where 40% of the deal flow, the economic development deal flow, businesses that were thinking of locating or expanding in Pennsylvania, and needed something out of the state of Pennsylvania. 40% of those deals in the entire state of Pennsylvania were coming from the Lehigh Valley. So I think that says a lot about our competitiveness. I had reaction to a lot of the statistics, and Michelle said it in a couple of contexts, that a lot of what happens in the Lehigh Valley is still colored by New Jersey. Good, bad, and indifferent. I'm looking at Pete right here, who's the one, Pete Renke from LVEDC, who talks to a lot of these folks. Despite a better business climate in New Jersey, and it has gotten tougher, there's still a lot of businesses flowing from New Jersey into Pennsylvania. And conversely, some of the unemployment statistics, over almost a 20-year period, there's been a lot of housing growth in the Lehigh Valley of people who live here but work in New Jersey. So the Lehigh Valley economy still very much, that statistic anyway, the unemployment statistic, still really colored by that. If somebody lives here and loses a job in New Jersey, it's very much influenced on that. But what are other comments on this? I mean, what's your experience? It looks like, despite the lack of the rest of it here, probably the predominant response is not very competitive, but at least competitive.
no one said the other options.
so
to
that
you.
is
Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that's certainly interesting that nobody in the room thinks, that we're not competitive with other areas.
We're going to have people bringing mics around so that your questions can be heard on the video. So anybody who would like to comment with Don, please raise your hand and we will have the mics come around.
Yeah, and I'd also say that some of it's, who are you competitive with? Again, competition to other metro areas in Pennsylvania, I think we're very competitive. Some of the other comparisons listed there, while I agree they're kind of comparable municipalities, some of them are essentially suburban New York economies, where their economies, driven by things that are coming out of New York City and finance industry things, and harder to make those comparisons, easier to compare us. If Pam said I get paid to work for PPL, so I interact with economic development groups, not in the whole state, but in a big chunk of Pennsylvania. And there's definitely a lot more happening here than there is, I should watch who I pick on, I guess, but Scranton, Wilkes-Barre. On the other hand, if you go up to places where the Marcellus shale business is driving the economy, like Williamsport, I wouldn't say we're not competitive with them, but there's a lot going on in that economy for that specific reason.
Competitive? I'd be curious to see why, and I have to check your clicking device. You just don't think we're very competitive. But if anyone who disagrees with this, please, this is our opportunity to discuss as a community what we see happening here.
Don addressed it. I don't want to be competitive with Winsboro, South Carolina. I want to be competitive with Portland, Oregon, and Boston, and hip places that are like cool to be part of. Washington, Baltimore, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the work that Holly's going to be doing on sustainable development, it's not all about gross numbers. It's about right jobs in the right place part of the equation too. And that's a little harder to measure, but I definitely agree with that. In fact, if you have growth and you do it wrong, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're going to get numbers on some of those other questions about how good a place is this to live that don't look so hot 10 years down the road if you don't plan it right.
As an African American in this area, looking at the statistics that were presented earlier, this is not a very competitive place for people like me. With an extended terminal degree, I still am not in the competitive range. So if you're satisfied with that, then yes, we're competitive. However, for different groups, it is not very competitive at all. So the question is, are we satisfied with that or not?
That's a great comment, and I think has been a long-running true comment about the Lehigh Valley, and a tough nut to get to a critical mass of keeping and growing the number of educated minorities in the Lehigh Valley. Don't know what to say about that. It's something that is absolutely valid, and something that really needs a lot more work, obviously, than has been devoted for it so far. Because in the 40 years I've been hanging around the Lehigh Valley trying to make a better place, we haven't put much of a dent in that.
And I just want to say, I'm coming from a space of a terminal degree. I'm not undereducated, I'm not disadvantaged, and
Gotcha.
it's still. So there are some discrepancies also, not just for those who don't have the education, for those who do. But I just wanted to clarify.
Oh,
that.
I absolutely. And working for a big company who, recruits educated people from all over the planet of all descriptions, it's a challenge to keep people here in the Lehigh Valley sometimes. I think as the sophistication and the diversity starts to creep up, maybe that challenge gets a little easier, but as we sit here today, it is definitely still a challenge.
One of the things that I think we were bringing into our answer was the industry that you're in. There are some large industries in this region that if you are a small organization, those larger organizations really do tend to suck all the oxygen out of the room and make it hard for an up-and-coming or a small organization to be competitive in this market.
Yeah, well, no question about that. If you looked at it cluster by cluster, my answer would be very different from, you know, certain things to others. And there's some things sort of buried in the numbers that in gross numbers, I don't think you'd see much of a resurgence in manufacturing, but some of the AEDC and City of Allentown folks are in. I know they're focusing more on small urban manufacturing, and there's a mini trend there. There's you know, we are competitive, and there's some things starting to happen there. Not enough to drive region-wide economy numbers, but things that are headed in the right direction. Huh?
Okay.
Question, sir, just a, excuse me, a question.
Okay, this has to be our last one on economics.
All right. Anecdotally, I've heard that the hottest area competitively is Stroudsburg. If you heard this, do you have any knowledge or facts to that effect? And this is just a small town attorney hearing people talk about business.
I don't know anything that would bear that out. I mean, I work with the Monroe County Economic Development people, and you know, they've done a nice job, and some things have happened there. But from what I see, I'd have to say their economy is a little slower than ours, although there's some peculiar things about their economy. It's more tourist-driven than the Lehigh Valley is. But in terms of general across-the-board economic development, seems to me they're a little slower. And of course, they have a lot of that in-migration from New York, New Jersey dynamic going on as well.
That's what I hear, and I hear people from the profession saying, if you want clients, go to Stroudsburg, for what it's worth.
Yeah, well, there's population growth there for sure.
Okay, thank you, Don. We're going to move on to question 2. Everybody's got your device now. Start it up again with hit the green arrow once. How satisfied are you with our public school system's ability to prepare residents for today's job market or college or the military, the next step after high school? A, very satisfied. B, somewhat satisfied. C, somewhat dissatisfied. D, very dissatisfied. E, not sure. Just hit your letter and then hit enter. They're jumping up there, so that's pretty good. Halfway there. Okay, 10 seconds. Okay. C, which was not too satisfied, I believe was our answer. No, I'm sorry, that was somewhat dissatisfied. Okay. All right, at this time, I would like to bring up John Reinhardt, who is the interim principal at the Bangor High School, was the superintendent for 10 years, also the Northampton County's rep on the Bi-County Health Board, along with several other hats that he wears, including one as my good friend, Mr. Reinhardt.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I didn't vote. I should have voted because I would have boosted that just a hair. My reaction to that is a good one. I hope that you're not satisfied with public education. The days that we become satisfied with the results that you see are the days that we should all just throw in the towel and walk away from things, I guess. Because the public education, for all of us, you know, we've all got a stake in it. And this nation, this community, as the Lehigh Valley, is a tremendous stake in what happens in our public schools. And I would hope that the reaction in this room would be that you're not satisfied, that you continue to be looking for and expecting better things from public education. Because that then drives me into the next statement, which is you're not getting what you deserve from public education. And in this particular set of circumstances today, we're not going to get what we should be getting from public education because the support that it needs isn't there right now. You saw the graphs earlier, and I'm not surprised to see that there has been tremendous growth because in general, I think if you pulled all of us who have been leading the charge in public education for the last 10 to 15 years, we would generally say to you, our schools are doing better. Are they where they need to be? No, they're not, because the difficulties we face in funding the programs we need, in facing the social challenges that kids bring to schools, the funding isn't there. But we're doing better at that. My concern right now, my reaction to this is that any of us in the room who has any influence with lawmakers and decision makers who are cutting budgets and expressing the support of just stopping the funding of public education at this point, you need to remind them that at the end of those cuts are faces of young people who are coming to school. And I can't help but think of that one commercial on television where the grandfather's holding his grandson. They're watching the name remove, and the grandson says, "I hope I can have a house one day." And the grandfather says, "So do I, son, so do I." But I have to tell you that growing up today and looking at the world from the eyes of a young person is far different than it was when we were that age. And there is a great deal of fear and skepticism. When I went to school, it was pretty much accepted. You get a college degree, you're going to succeed in life. Your life's going to be good. Well, I'll tell you what, that's not a given anymore. You know that, and I know that. And I'm wondering even if we should be measuring things anymore by a four-year degree, because that's changed too. The message from lots of quarters is a two-year degree. So I guess what I'm saying to you is that I hope that you are dissatisfied, and I hope that dissatisfaction rings true when you have a conversation with other people who are saying, "It's a waste of money." It is not a waste of money. It is far from it. It is the one institution that remains that's going to keep our community vibrant and strong and together. And all of us who are working in our cities, in the rural schools, all around Lehigh Valley, are looking to what we've been able to do with some increased funding over the last 10 years. And we're really concerned about what's going to happen when that funding stream stops. I mean, it's stopped. You've seen the headlines all over. In the Poconos, they're selling school buildings. We can't let that happen to our younger generation. We can't, because the link between economic success and a vibrant Lehigh Valley, that link is with a vibrant and successful public school system. No question about it. All the research will show you that.
I'm curious at what point, because I agree with a lot of what you said about how education can be used as a social balm, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I'm also wondering at what point, as an administrator, you would either report to the lawmakers or to the funders or the policymakers that some of what you're asking us to do falls well beyond the realm of what a school should do, but rather the slack should be picked up by community leaders or other private or government programs that would ease the burden, if you will, of the funding crisis in education.
Yeah, could you restate that just a little bit? I think so I can understand better your question.
Sure. Because I've done my education in the College of Education here.
Yes.
And so this is something that I've looked at in policy classes, and
sure.
Definitely a lot of, especially the when education turns to the political spectrum as it does now. Ultimately, a lot of what's in contention is the miscellaneous, if you will, of what schools are charged with doing. And that miscellaneous ends up becoming very expensive. And so I'm wondering, in that, when you're responsible for a child from 7:30 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon,
Yes.
and subsequently, funding 2 to 3 to even
Yes.
4 meals for that child. At what point would you say we can't afford the very basic nature of educating everybody because we're being charged with doing
I see.
so many
Okay.
social services that fall
Sure.
outside of education?
Well, I've evolved with that too. It's 42 years in education, in public education, and I will tell you that it's unfortunate that schools have had to pick up the social piece of things because that is expensive. But it's expensive. It would be far more expensive if we didn't do that. Two things come to mind, and again, I think it's a reflection of where I've been, what I've seen so far. But I do believe in this notion of if we have public facilities paid for by public funds, then let's use them for every public opportunity we can. And if we've got space in public schools to house family centers, isn't that a wiser use of money than it is to go and rent a facility somewhere else? If we've got opportunities to put clinics in schools to reach more kids and to make our money go in far more directions, that makes good sense. I guess what I would say to you is there's enough research out there over the last 10 to 12 years to show what works and what doesn't work. One good example is I don't believe I've ever read a piece of research yet that hasn't underscored the value of preschool education. Nothing impacts more on the future and the welfare of this country within a social context or economic context as affordable, accessible, quality early childhood care. There's nothing that would make the greater difference than that, and we're still not where we need to be. So I guess what I would say to you is I would look at those who are making decisions and say, would you please read the research, see what programs are working, and instead of just holding funding at the 2006 level, fund what works, don't fund what doesn't work. If something's not right, then don't keep shoving money that way. But goodness, there's so much research out there now about how kids learn and how important all this is. So much is at stake. Fund what works, but don't cut it off and don't hold it back. Fund what works and hold people accountable at every level. And I think people, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to health, number 3. Everybody have your clicker. What's that? Michelle, did you say something? Oh, sorry, okay. Which of the following do you rate as the most significant problem in the Lehigh Valley today? A, air quality. B, health disparities due to income. C, I think it's, well, was it health disparities, Michelle? That's what we wanted, not access to health? Okay. C, mental health. D, obesity. And E, other. I guess, are we starting? Oh, we started already. We have more than 30 seconds on this one. Oh, we're clicking very fast. Okay. Okay. We have a lot of time left on this one. You get 3 tries, she said. If you can't hear in the back, you have 3 tries. So if you clicked before the question was finished, click again. If it says received, I guess we already did receive your response. 10 seconds. Okay. There we go. B, health disparities due to income. Well, that's leads right into our next speaker, Vicki Kistler, who is the director of the Allentown Health Bureau since 2006, and she's held a number of different jobs at the Allentown Health Bureau since her arrival there in 1993. Vicki, welcome.
Thank you. I do find it interesting that you all, almost all, chose B. Health disparities due to income, I think, has taken on new meaning for many people in the last decade or so. I don't remember a time when we had so many people thought of as middle income or working and doing well, stressing about the availability of benefits, or stressing about the availability of being able to see a doctor or a dentist or an eye doctor. And I think that the category of health disparities is definitely one of an economic development basis. I mean, we look at our companies, we look at our workforces, and if you really take this data, I know it was hard to keep up with Michelle because she was under a time crunch, but if you really delve into this data, I personally find it absolutely fascinating. When we look at the issue of mental health, look at the age cohort in those mental health statements. We aren't talking about a senior population who's saying, I don't feel as though I'm healthy. We're talking about 30 to 39-year-old people who are saying, I'm sad, I'm depressed. And when we talk about access to health care under health disparities, one of our biggest issues is mental health. So mental health and that health disparities, in my mind, goes very, very closely hand in hand. And you look at what is your workforce? There's an awful lot of businesses represented here today who have a workforce between the age of 26 and, let's say, 36 or 40. Those people are struggling with that income issue of a mortgage. They're struggling with their kids in a failing or a succeeding school district. They're struggling with aging parents. They're struggling with a number of those issues, and very many of them are depressed, and very many of them are men who don't traditionally access a mental health system because it's not the macho or the socially acceptable thing to do. And then we take it a step further and we look at the minority population data in this report. Even if a Latina in the community wants good mental health or good health care, often it's very difficult, even if they can afford it, to find someone who speaks their language, who understands their culture, is available to them at a time when meets their work schedule. So we look at that income issue and we look at that mental health issue and we wonder why businesses struggle. We wonder why schools struggle, because basically the individuals, the family ability to thrive is compromised by our ability to keep our workforce mentally and physically happy. And I find it interesting that when you ask people how healthy they are, that same cohort separates mental health from physical health and says, physically, I'm very healthy, but I happen to be depressed 2 or more weeks out of the year. And I think that was an excellent point made, that no matter how educated you are, if you're in one of the minority groups reflected in this report, you have barriers and challenges that go far beyond what the less challenged group faces in terms of keeping our businesses thriving. I look at the city of Allentown and people say, well, development of new business is down, so you shouldn't have as many restaurant inspections and you shouldn't have as many permitting or licensing issues or things like that. The economy is slow. That isn't at all true in the realm of public health. In public health, we've had a lot of businesses close, and we've had a lot of minority small businesses pop up, mom and pop restaurants, mom and pop stores, who have a tremendous amount of difficulty being able to get off the ground and stay solvent, and can't imagine tackling the issue of health care for the people that are working for them. Because their income is too low to have it for themselves, how are they going to provide it to their workforce? So if we can't keep our workforce gainfully employed and we can't keep our minority population healthy, we're fragmented. And one of the things that I like about this report is it talks about a regional perspective. We are as, and it's a cliche, but we are as weak as our weakest point. So we can't say, I'm not Hispanic, that doesn't affect me. I'm not African American, that doesn't affect me. I'm not Asian, it doesn't affect me. It affects all of us. And you know, we tried to tackle the concept of regional public health in our community. Unsuccessfully so far, but the efforts continue because we realize that the health, both physical and mental, and the disparity in being able to access that health has a direct community and economic development impact. And until we start to look at all of these components, not as they struggling, the kids struggling, the domestic violence victims struggling, the Asians struggling, the whatever, and we look at it as the health and the welfare of our region as a whole, we aren't going to be as competitive as we would like to be, and we aren't going to be a place that's a good place to be healthy instead of a really good valley to be sick. You're welcome.
Can we do one question?
Vicki, I think you brought up.
Vicki, I think you brought up great points, and I'm especially concerned about the data that I see about Hispanics. Obviously, I am Latina, and I'm very concerned about double the number of Latinos that are feeling that they're sad 2 weeks or more out of the year, and the Latinos are experiencing, I think, 4 times greater poverty than whites in the Lehigh Valley. And considering that Latinos grew about 80% in the state, I don't remember what the rates are for the Lehigh Valley specifically, but and I know you mentioned some of the reasons why some of the Latinos feel mental health challenges because they don't have enough providers that maybe speak their language or et cetera. But is the LVRC or other researchers out there trying to find strategies on solutions and some ways that we can mitigate some of these negative statistics that I'm reading? How can we make this better? We know what the data is now, so how can we turn the curve?
Well, I definitely think there are some efforts. I think there are some very good school-based efforts that are working on cultivating students into the workforce. I think that many of our leading employers have made strides in attempting to diversify the services that they offer and to reach populations that they've never looked at before. But I think it's a tremendous amount of work to be done. And I think somebody made the statement of what do we accept? I think we've come to accept a lot. I mean, we want great air quality days. We want that. But we want 3 cars apiece. So we have to, at some point, realize that there's a give and take in all of this. And I think we've been able to sit back and say, oh, we can't fix the mental health system. It's too complicated. There's nothing we can do. We can't fix Medicare and Medicaid. We can't fix. At some point, we have to realize that it's imperative that we do. So I think those little efforts that very often go underfunded or go unnoticed are the ones that we have to start somewhere, and whether it's one school or whether it's one kid or whether it's one family, we have to start somewhere because we're tolerating the fact that it just isn't enough. And these statistics aren't going to change unless we stop tolerating that and starting somewhere.
Just add, since Carol mentioned the LVRC, the impetus for the St. Luke's study was actually the 2010 Patient Affordability Act, which requires all of our nonprofit 501c3 hospital providers to prepare a strategic plan and a community health plan. So the hope is that St. Luke's and LVH and Good Shepherd, all of our hospitals will take this data and our nonprofits and work together to say this is something new that some of us knew but is really more important perhaps than we thought in the past. So how can we, again, as a community, work together to put into our strategic plans addressing this particular issue? So I think the process has started. I just think it needs to, to continue onward.
Exactly.
Okay, please hang out with us just for a few more minutes. We are going to skip question 4 in the interest of time and move right to the last question. In your opinion, is life getting better or worse in the Lehigh Valley? A, getting better, B, getting worse, C, staying the same, D, you're just not sure. We've got a lot of time left on this one. Still a few more to be registered, it looks like. We got 10 seconds if you haven't clicked in yet. Okay, there we go. Life is getting better for everybody in the Lehigh Valley. Well, not everybody, for 42 of you. But that's the majority in this room right now. To shed a little bit of light on this, we're going to call Christopher Bork. Dr. Bork is the Associate Professor of Political Science at Muhlenberg College and the Director of the Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It's nice to be able to do a survey where you could do it so quickly and we don't have to bother you over dinner or when you're watching American Idol. This is much easier. We just bother you over lunch. Very good. You know, the numbers here are, if you look in your report, are different than what Lehigh Valley residents have told us over a number of years. There is a nagging and persistent pessimism about the direction of life in the valley, despite overall views that this is a good place to live. The way I look at it is people like it here, they think it's a good place to live, but it's tenuous. In other words, they don't feel that necessarily it's something that they could hold on to or that the region as itself can hold on to. And that's been clear now for a number of years where we've seen very little progress in terms of how people view it. Now, interestingly, this might be, you might be the front guard of new optimism in the sense that we did our last survey last spring in I think May or April. So it's been in 9 or so months since. Perhaps we're seeing a turn. Some national surveys have shown a bit of a turn, just a bit up. Still, more people are negative than positive about national direction, but overall we're seeing some positive trends. One thing I note before I take a few opinions from you, more specifically, is that a lot of these differences we've seen are, or differences in opinion on the direction of the valley, very much mirror some of the things we've talked about today. If we look across race, if we look across regions, if we look at where you live, the city versus the suburb in the valley, if we look at race, we look at educational attainment, all those things are fairly significant predictors of how you might view the direction of life here, and also overall quality of life in general. And I think I talked about this last year, the idea of the two-valley syndrome. You hate to see that in many ways we are bifurcating or becoming a valley where there are satisfied people and people enjoying quality of life and those that aren't. But unfortunately, a great deal or a significant portion of the empirical data that we've seen today and in public opinion data says just that. And that's an ongoing concern, and I'm glad that we're talking about that and continuing to talk about that today. I'd ask you, I'd love to hear just a couple of quick seconds, I know we're running low on time, for folks that think it's getting better, why? And for those that think it's not or the same, why not? Quiet. I'll call on people, I'm a teacher. There's somebody.
I think one of the main reasons it's getting better, this is purely because of the increased awareness of the younger generation. I have a 20-year-old daughter. Many people have kids our age here, many of my friends and colleagues, and they're so, they're almost back to the 60s. They're really caring. They're really smart. They're very inclusive. They're very accepting of diversity. And not a lot of the things that we probably growing up in the 70s, we didn't have it all together. I think they're a combination of the 60s and the 70s, these children now, that young adults, in the best way. And they're all now joining some of the mainstream things like churches and lots of different organizations. And I'm just really hopeful because of the generation that is coming forth.
Oh, here you go. Got a mic.
Oh, I probably don't need that. I'm originally from Ohio, and we were back visiting my husband's family in Youngstown. And when you see a region that is truly dying, and you come back here, there's a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of growth here, and I think there's a lot of people that are motivated to make change. And I didn't realize it until I got back there and really saw what they're dealing with there. And it truly is. It's a dying region that is in a lot of poverty and a lot of bad school districts and just a whole mecca of stuff going on. So I do think that there is a lot of opportunity, there is a lot of growth, there is a lot of diversity, which I, for one, am glad that my children are growing up in. So, I think 2 years ago, I might not have answered that I think it's getting better, but I do definitely think things are more positive and getting better here.
That's great. By the way, just when you look at some of the things that people tell us in our annual surveys about why they like it here, they point to some of the general quality of life, the availability of recreation, the place to raise a family. That always comes. In fact, that was at a record level during our last
polling cyclists. Lehigh Valley as a place to raise your kids is very good. The most persistent negative thing is the economic things that you said, Ed. And so that's why I'm really intrigued when we go into the field this year and see if the moderate economic rebound that we're seeing has some of a play. Great points.
I answered it more from the population that we work with at the Head Start and Early Head Start program in the Lehigh Valley. And I think for families in poverty, it's not getting any better, and it's getting worse for them because all the other access to support services have lost funding over the years, and we can only do so much from a preschool perspective, and we're very successful with that in meeting those outcomes for young children. But when it comes to their families, we don't have a lot of funding and support to do what they truly need to get out of poverty. And it just seems like it is such a depressing situation for them. And we're talking about cycles of poverty that we're hopeful that this generation will not be in poverty, but it's so deep-rooted that it takes so much effort and so much out there, and there's not the jobs available for them to have incomes to get a better job, to get a good job, to go back to school. They don't have those resources, and things keep getting cut. So for the poverty population, I don't see it getting better for families.
Great points.
I was born and raised here, and I won't tell you how old I am, but I do remember growing up around Lehigh University, and this was my stomping grounds for a long time when I was younger. And I can agree that it's always a matter of perspective. So I left here going to grad school in Washington, D.C., and I saw Washington at the end of the Clinton era kind of do its little wobbly thing that it did. And I can honestly say that compared to places like Washington, D.C. at a public health level, we're nowhere near where we need to be. I also work as an interpreter for one of the hospitals here, aside from being a technical professional. And I can tell you the people that I have to interpret for are usually refugees, and they're at a great loss for any economic opportunity. I mean, they're here on political asylum or they're here legitimately. They're here through Catholic Relief Services, and they're only given a limited amount of time and support that they don't know where to go. They're working for meatpacking plants, and these are doctors and dentists from Iraq and from Sudan and from Syria. I don't know that my perspective might be a little jaded, but I'm telling you from the people that I'm working with that I don't see it getting better. I think we're being a burden on our refugees, and we're being burdened by populations that were expected by the federal government to be able to support them, and I don't know that we have the economic stability nor the ability to thrive to support our people that are coming.
Great. Thank you.
All right. I think at this point we're a little bit over anyway, so we will begin to wrap up. I would like to call Alan Jennings up to give some closing remarks. As Alan makes his way up, I just want to make 3 really quick points. First of all, thank you to the Lehigh University Community Fellows. Rachel Bradshaw works with me at Renew Lehigh Valley, but she also, I'm going to say, brought along. They were very willing volunteers, and they were the young ladies you saw at the table out front and have been running the mics around in here. So thank you to Lehigh for the community. Oh, and Ben in the back. I'm sorry. And we have one more in the back. I said young ladies. I'm sorry, Ben. I didn't mean to leave you out. So that's number 1. Number 2, I would also like to just recognize my board at Renew Lehigh Valley, who are the most supportive people. I'm on the board at Bangor, so I know what the board member part of things is, but to be the staffer and have the board giving all the time that they give to the nonprofits in the Lehigh Valley, that's one of the reasons why this is such a great place. You said it yourself that there are so many people who care, and while we have our deficiencies and really need to continue to work on those, we have a whole lot of people in this room who just really want the Lehigh Valley to get better for the Lehigh Valley, not for Susie, not for Jimmy, not for Pam, not for John, just because they want the Lehigh Valley to get better, and that's what makes this a really, really great place. So I just wanted to thank my board who supports me in doing these sorts of things. So if you just want to stand up real quick, the Renew board, I know you're all kind of scattered around here, please. And I know I wasn't gonna do that, but I'm sorry. But thank you very much for coming. And finally, what our goal today was to try and lift the fog off of some of this data. And if all of you, before you leave, would look around the outside and look at this beautiful view, that fog is gone, and here's the clarity that you all should have received with this luncheon for your fee, along with your State of the Lehigh Valley report. So thank you very much, and Alan will wrap it up for us. Thank you, Alan.
You know that slide about blue for 2 weeks of the year? I'd love to, to be blue for just 2 weeks of the year. Because, you know, I stand before you just frustrated as hell, and you know, it's clear that the work that I'm doing is just not having the impact that we need to have as a community. But there's something that just won't let me give up. Friends, we're too good a place. We're too good a people to accept what we heard today. We know what our problems are. We know that those problems won't go away on their own. They aren't like the monster under our beds, imaginary creatures that will skedaddle when our moms or dads come in and turn on the lights on. What too few of us understand, though, is that these problems have solutions. That somewhere in the mix of shared sacrifice, thoughtful investments, both private and, yes, public, and a will to make the difference, is the potent cocktail that can solve almost any problem. The problems we discussed today require us to be a little more honest, a little less polite, and a little less patient. Patience really is an overrated virtue. It's the luxury of the powerful, the comfortable, and the affluent. We really don't have that luxury. And those on the margins, those we have long been too willing to cast aside, are living from crisis to crisis, and few of us make good decisions when we're in a crisis. And friends, the crisis is enveloping more and more of us, and few of our communities are immune to those crises. La La Land is a myth. It's in our heads. So let's snap out of it. Let's collectively agree that we can solve these problems. Let's stop picking fights like drug testing welfare recipients that distract us and divide us and prevent us from coming together. This is not about the 99% versus the 1%. Many of the folks in the 1% genuinely want to be part of the solution. It's about the 99% versus itself. Those who can pay their mortgages versus those who can't. Those who collect unemployment benefits versus those who are employed. The old divides, black versus white, gay versus straight. Folks on one side of the tracks versus those on the other side of the tracks. These distractions are no more than a crafty tool by those who don't share our sense of community, those who don't understand the common good, those who would all too quickly turn their backs on their neighbors. So let's be bold in resisting those distractions. Let's be bold in locking arms instead of turning our backs. Let's be bold about the solutions. Let's be bold in our tactics. Let's be bold in our sense of urgency. Thanks for being a part of this today.